Hello and welcome back to EVE Online with me, Mark from Dadex, and the beautiful planet Metzerel 3, where in part 1 of the guide we set up quite a basic planetary interaction setup to extract base metals, turn them into reactive metals, and make us back some money. So in the second part we're going to develop this as if we had 2 planets set up. Then we're going to look at a multiple planet setup that I run with multiple alts and see how they interact with each other. See how much money you can start making once you get to the more advanced levels. But first of all, a little bit of feedback from part 1. I'm glad a lot of you have enjoyed it and found it very useful and motivational. I'd like to give a special shout out to Keyspace, who left a couple of good comments. One was that we can go into the in-game map and we can filter on here our scan range, and I've already got it here. It's in the settings. I couldn't find it. It's in personal, because I guess it is a skill on your person, and it gives you on the map, and I only have level 2 of the remote scanning skill on this sort. It gives you the map how far away you can do the remote scanning on the planet. Now I seem to be getting up to about 7 or 8 jumps for some of these planets that I could reach with my remote scan if I come up around this way. I'm not sure how jumps relate. In fact, it's less than that on this sort, isn't it? I'm not getting more than about 3 or 4. I'm not really sure how jumps and light years relate, and we'll talk about that in a minute when I look at another source of information for you. What really does confuse me, and as we'll see later, is that I've got a setup in a wormhole I've never had trouble managing. That alt has got level 3 of the skill, and I've seen from looking at different alts that takes you up to about 19 jumps. Average of about 14 in the range that you can scan. But we'll have another look at that later. Also, if you wanted to, you can filter the map down here to show where particular planet types are and how many there are in each system. So there's 2 barren planets right there in Hatakani, etc, etc. So that's another thing you could do from the map, yeah, and it's just that dotlan is a very useful resource, but there are resources in game, and we'll be seeing more as we go through this episode. Now the agency is another one that Keyspace pointed out. And if we go back to the home screen, just so you can find it, resource harvesting, planetary production, I've set this to show all the barren planets and plasma planets within 2 jumps of where I am, and they're all listed down here. And if you click on one, you can see what planets are there, and you can interact right here. You can set the destination to that system. You can buy the appropriate command center, although you may have to go and pick it up because they're not available everywhere, and you could do it this way. And also here in the agency, if you want to check any of these planets, say we'll check on Salin 2 here. If you right click on there, you can go straight into planetary production and have a look and just do a scan from here of what is available. Again, noble metals, look, even in low sec, that's a 0.4 system, Salin. Very little noble metals to be found. You compare that to the base metals that are on that planet. A very different picture. So do bear that in mind. It's very important to remember resources can be very scarce. Okay, another way of checking planets and scanning them remotely is just to use the system info screen. So in Metzerel we can check any other planet and just go into the planetary production view and again see that there's no noble metals. You can do exactly the same from the map from any system. So if we just put our planet scan range filter back on, so any of those, if you like the look of them, so where can we go, 2 jumps, 4 jumps away, we can still go in there, show info, go to any of the planets here, open the planetary production view, and we can start scanning. There we are. So there are different ways of you just checking out planets remotely. Notice I'm not undocking for basically most of this episode apart from to move materials. All the admin is done whilst docked. That's very important to remember. You don't have to be floating around near space near your planets to actually do the building, do the moving, do the admin. All you do is go and pick up stuff and put stuff in. Going back to our planet, lovely Metzerel 3. What we're going to do is pretend, well, I don't need to pretend. As you can see, I've got all these planets in Anne, some of which produce precious metals, although they're managed in a different way. But I've got in my hold, right now I've got in my hold the reactive metals that we brought back from our launch. So I'm going to put in some precious metals, and we're going to go out, we're going to set this up to do tier 2 production, and we're also going to then seed it so that it can start doing that straight away. And we'll just look at some numbers first, because this is also another real eye opener. So here's a spreadsheet. This is tab 1. This is just what we spent on the PI so far, so it's nearly 2.2 million. But in that 12-hour cycle that we ran in part 1, we made back just over $500,000. So in a couple of days, you're going to cover the cost of setting that setup up just with the materials that you produced. There are no additional overheads to your PI. You don't have to fuel it or pay any maintenance. It's just these setup costs. Over on this tab, I've just done a few sums, and this is just to illustrate some points. Now, we've got the raw material, which in our case is base metals, which we're processing into reactive metals. If we then refine that along with precious metals or toxic metals into another refined material, what we're doing is we're reducing 120 cubic meters of the base material to 30.4 cubic meters of the processed material, and then refining that down into 7.5 cubic meters of refined material. So that is a huge decrease in volume. And then as you refine into the next step, you get about half the volume, and then the final step of production doesn't really change it. It goes down very, very slightly. But here, certainly at this level, your hauler can only carry so many cubic meters, and it's much better for you to carry much more of the refined item than it is the processed or raw material. Many, many less runs in and out of low sec especially, but just in general the housekeeping is going to be much less. Down here in this second section, we can see what happens when we convert 3,000 of the raw materials into a batch of 20 of the processed materials, because that is the batch. You put 3,000 base metals in, you get 20 reactive metals out. Now volume wise, as I said, we're going from 30 cubic meters to 7.6 cubic meters. Value wise, it doesn't always add a lot of value onto the product. What it does do is obviously greatly increase the value of each shipment of the product that you're taking to market. Down here, again, you can see some sums. So if I put in 40 of each material to produce 5 of a refined commodity, so 40 reactive metals and 40 precious metals will produce 5 mechanical parts. So we're condensing down the 30.4 cubic meters to 7.5 cubic meters. And we add in some value from about 31,700 to about 42,500 in refining those into that part. As you can see, it varies slightly. There's not as much profit to be made on the enriched uranium because it needs precious metals, which is the most expensive material that we use. Whereas construction blocks, because it's only reactive metals and toxic metals, which are inherently a lower value than the precious metals, we're getting a healthier profit there than we are from making the precious metals and toxic metals into enriched uranium. So they're the options of the 3 things that I could make with the planets that I operate out in low sec, as we'll look at later. But that's basically how it breaks down. So if we come back to our setup, as you can see, there's a little animation. You can see all the links are busy running. There's not necessarily stuff being moved, but that's showing us how the routes have been assigned. So this one here is a 2-way route. This one up here has nothing assigned to it. We only use that for the expedited transfer to get the goods off of planet. This one here only has a 1-way route, and you can also see by hovering over them what capacity has been assigned. So we've got plenty of capacity left. There's a little bit of variance because of the way the materials are being routed back and forth, and the fact that I've got one less link here there's only one link between this factory and the rest of the network, whereas the rest have all got 2. So there's a little bit of variance. If you do get to the point where you need to upgrade one because it hits capacity, and that won't happen until later on, and it's something you can avoid in the design if you're a little bit careful. But if you just double click there, you can upgrade it, and here is the current capacity. We can double the capacity with an upgrade. And upgrades don't cost any money, which is a little bit good, but a little bit strange maybe. What they do is increase the demands power grid and CPU wise of the link on the network. So just bear that in mind. You can upgrade them, but they are going to be more consuming of your resources if you do. So just keep them where they need to be. We need to get to the extractor because it's not doing anything. It's wasting time, it's wasting money. So We can see we're pretty much well centered in on the best area. You can zoom these heads in. If you actually look at the numbers, that's 85.1 is going to be the yield from this head on this screen. If I move it round, I can get a little bit more, but not really much. So it's up to you how much you want to min-max this, as I've said before. If they do touch, you will see they get highlighted red up here, and if they've got a kind of a red background, they do get a little bit fuzzy here. You just need to make sure they're not touching, because the interference cuts their yield. Now, something you also might want to know is how much your production cycle is actually going to produce. And to do that, if you look at this bar, this is split into the 15-minute production cycles of the extractor. So we can see here after 15 minutes it's going to produce 9,829 units of base metals. Now that's good, because we're moving those to free production facilities which work on cycles and batches of 3,000 materials. So every cycle pretty much is producing enough material to keep that cycle running. We've got a little bit of a gap up here, but that's okay, because we'll have accumulated the secondary material here to keep the higher level production which we're going to have running. So little gaps in the extraction cycle aren't a big deal. If we go all the way down to the end bar, you can see the accumulated amount is 327,048 units of base metals. Now we can figure out exactly how much reactive metals that is going to become using the calculator. So if we're over here, we're going to have to do a little bit of a memory here. 327048, 327048. Now we're going to put that into the production in batches of 3,000. So we're going to divide that by 3,000, which equals 109.016. Now we're going to times that by 20, because remember we're producing, the batches produce 20 units of reactive metals. So we can tell that in that 12-hour production run, we're going to produce enough base metals to produce 2,180.32 units of reactive metals. So to keep up with the cycles on tier 2 production, we're going to need to bring in somehow 2,180 units of the second material that we need for that production, and that's what we're going to look at now. So we're going to get this extractor running. We'll submit. So he's off and running, he's extracting, we can get on with the development. So we've got our 3 facilities producing reactive metals which are going in here. We have some reactive metals left in here because we couldn't get the whole batch off in one planetary launch, if you remember, due to the size restriction on the command center. You can only launch off 500 cubic meters at a time, which is a really bad restriction. So the first thing we're going to put down here is a launch pad, which I sometimes call a spaceport by mistake. So if I do, please forgive me, I mean a launch pad. Now again, we just need to put this in our network. We're going to put it as close as we can to our storage facility right there, but we haven't got enough power. So we're going to need to upgrade again. So if we click on the command center, click on the upgrade tab, now we're going to click up here. So we're going to put the command center to level 4 using level 3 of the upgrade skill, and that will increase the power output by 3,000 megawatts, which is more than we need, and a great increase to CPU, which we still have quite a lot spare of, but we'll use that up as we go along. So we're going to upgrade that. If you want to know what you're short, if you hover over any of the facilities here, it will tell you what the build cost is, it tells you what the power consumption and CPU load are. So now we can put in, first of all, submit our upgrade. So that exists, and then we're just going to put in the Baron launch pad right here. And submit, and then we're just going to link in one link for now into that storage facility. Submit. So now he's sat there. So the next stage is just to check that we've got the right load in our sigil, which is precious metals, and we can undock. And you can stay in the planetary screen. You're in high sec, it doesn't really matter. I usually go out of the planetary screen when I'm in space. It's just easier for me to keep track of the space side of things. But if we now open the planetary production tab, we're going to right click on the planet, and we're heading for the customs office. Now all of this flying for your PI can be done from this screen. So customs office, warp to within, and we're off. And while we're even on the way there, we can go Customs Office, Access Customs Office. Now this is basically the interface, as we'll see when we're up there, between the planet and us. Our launch pad launches to the Customs Office. We'll then have to pay an 18% tax, which is very high. We'll find better alternatives than that, hopefully, in order to move our material through this Customs Office and get it off planet. That's still probably about the same tax rate it was costing us to use the Planetary launches. So it's not great, but the thing is that the volumes are much less restricted. So we are now there. So let's actually close the Planetary production window. Here is the Customs Office, and usually there is a little bit of an animation of the traffic coming in and out of it, but we'll see. That's not really what we're here for. But all we need to do now is open up our cargo hold. I've deliberately put this episode in quite a high resolution because it's all about the words and the numbers, so forgive me for those of you that really don't like it. But it's just easier on everybody's eyes, and I'll tell you, I'll be the first to admit, it's especially easy on my eyes. Anyway, we're just going to drag and drop our precious metals over here into the Customs Office. That hasn't cost us anything to do that. But now we're going to drag and drop it over to our Baron launch pad. Now it's going to cost us 69,000 ISK to do that. Nearly 68,112, and we're going to transfer it. The precious metals are now on the planet. We can now dock. We don't need to be out here at all. That's it, our job is done. So go. We're off, we're safely docking. We go back into our Planetary management view. We don't need that window open for now. We don't even need the overview. We'll shove it right over there. So now in our launch pad we have the precious metals. Now we don't really need to move this around internally, and we've got nowhere to put the precious metals yet. So the next thing we're going to need to build is one advanced industrial facility, and we're going to put that down right about there, and we're going to submit, and then we're going to put a link in between that facility and the launch pad. Nearly said spaceport, launch pad, and confirm. So the next thing we need to do, we're going to click on the advanced industry facility. We need to give it a schematic. It already seems to know, it's guessing, I guess, from what I've got on the planet, that I want to build mechanical parts, which indeed I do. So that's going to be 40 reactive metals plus 40 precious metals is going to produce 5 mechanical parts. So yeah, we'll install that schematic and submit. So if we click on there, it's telling us it's got nothing here, it's got roots missing, so we're going to have to route in the precious metals, create route to that facility, create route, and then we submit. We've got one yellow ring, you can't really see it very well, but one ring there has turned a yellow. If we go here, we can already route the reactive metals that we've got left over here up into that industrial facility, and click submit, and now it's got everything it needs to produce. What it hasn't got now, we need to click here on the products tab, click on mechanical parts. It needs a route. We'll route that back to the launch pad, create route, submit, and it is now in production. It's a 1 hour cycle, so when you do your maths you do have to bear in mind cycle times. If you want to kind of project what you're going to be producing, you do need to bear the cycle times in mind a little. But as I said, how detailed you want to get about the numbers in regards to your PI is entirely down to you. For this planet we're just going to maximize the production and the processing, so we're going to put 2 more advanced facilities in. I am rushing this a little bit and it's not very pre-planned, so these could be probably much tidier. I've seen some wonderfully symmetrical PI setups, so forgive me. Right, power core, I can't link these in, so I'm going to need to upgrade the power core again. So we're going to click on the command center, we're going to click on upgrades, we're going to go to level 4. It's going to cost us 1.5 million, but these really aren't huge sums of money at all. The other alternative would just be to have the free industrial facilities and just have a little bit of an overlap in your production, which you could easily manage, especially as I said when you've got multiple planets and you can shift materials around. But we're going to go ahead and upgrade, submit, so we can link these 2 guys in. Now the alternatives that would make most sense, an option would be to put in another extractor, Another option would be simply to, on some of your planets, have no extraction and use the whole thing as a factory setup. We will be looking at that in the future. So once you're up and running and you've got 2 or 3 planets running, you can have a little think about exactly how you want to play things. Get all the routing done, remember, or nothing happens. You'll get used to this very quickly. Precious metals, create route to there, create route. Precious metals, create route to there, create route. Click on the storage. Reactive metals, create route to there, and then click back there. Reactive metals, create route to there, create, and there you go. You can stack these commands up a little bit. That's still not happy. What haven't I done? I haven't routed any reactive metals into that facility. So reactive metals, create route. Did I do it twice into the same one before? Probably, knowing me. There you go. So we're all set up. These are now all running. So there you go, we're all up and running after our 12-hour cycle. All of the materials that we've had on this planet in terms of precious metals and reactive metals extracted will have been combined into mechanical parts, which will be sat in a launch pad ready for us to fire up to the customs office, go and pick up, at which point when we're doing that at the same time we'll top up the precious metals from the second planet to keep everything running nice and smoothly. So now we're going to go to low sec and see this kind of thing in operation. So over in low sec, Anne has, I didn't name her after this system, honestly. She's got 4 planets in there, all very similar in setup to this setup here. In fact, all of my setups are quite similar to this setup here. This is another alt. Crankbot has got 5 planets running over in Anne. So basically these 3 characters, Miss Valazy is the 3rd. So these alts all have level 4 of the planetary interaction skill, and they're working on the upgrade skill. So the thing is with this PI, it has been in place for 2 years, at least 2 years, and it's just kind of evolved over time as the guy's skills have gone up. So it is what it is, but definitely if there's a part 3 of this PI guide, it's going to be me completely tearing this PI down and rebuilding it possibly, because I can see it can certainly be made much more efficient. But as you can see, if we just look at a random planet, we've got extraction, precious metals in this case. We've got 2 of the basic facilities processing that into precious metals, and then I've got 2 advanced facilities which are being topped up with the reactive metals from one of the other planets. And basically all we need to do is fly when they're ready from planet to planet. So every 3 days these 3 alts come over here, we fly around, we pick up the produce, we move the materials. So here we're producing reactive metals, we'll pick up the reactive metals, drop them into this station, pick up the mechanical parts. And as you can see, I'm not going to go through every setup individually because they're all basically the same. We will have a look at how they develop when I rebuild them, but what I've shown you out in Metzerel is what I've got here. Only in here I've got 14 planets running in Anne. So if you look on this screen, this section here is telling you what you're extracting. So we're extracting noble metals. This is production, so these are the 2 materials that we've got running through the production facilities. We're producing precious metals from the noble metals, and we're producing the mechanical parts from the precious metals and the reactive metals that we ship in. Here is what we've actually got stored on the planet. So we've managed to make in 3 days 1,000 units of mechanical parts on this planet, and we've got a bit of reactive metals left over. So that's cool, we judged that about right, 520 spare. What you may also want to do if you want to get your level 2 production running very quickly is just drop off a little bit of precious metals when you go there, so that first cycle of production will run. I mean, we're really not talking about saving much time, but if you really want to min-max it, you can do that, basically seed the production, so even before the cycles start you've got enough materials there for your production runs to start. So every single alt is basically making mechanical parts, or something towards mechanical parts, with one exception, because Crankbot here has got 1 planet. Let me find it. This one here, we're making heavy metals. Heavy metals are then refined into toxic metals. The toxic metals are actually then passed over back to Anne. Anne's using 2 of her planets, their production facilities, to produce construction blocks from toxic metals and reactive metals. So between those 3 materials, reactive metals, I'm combining them with precious metals to make the mechanical parts, and I'm combining them with toxic metals to make construction blocks. So we've got 1,000 made on that planet in 3 days. We've got about 1,100 made on that planet in 3 days. About 1,100 here in 3 days. As you can see, there's a pattern to it. If I can keep this all running properly, should produce about 1,000 each. That will vary because some of these factories are basically dealing with what in effect was an overflow. So that's kind of what I mean about the way this whole setup has evolved. As you've seen, it really doesn't take millions and millions to set up your PI. So every now and again, if you want to tear something down and rebuild it, it's really not a big deal. Now the other thing, if we go back to Crankbot, who's a little bit ahead on the PI skills, I've got another planet I can set up. Now here in Anne, there isn't another planet where I can set up where I'm going to get the precious metals, the reactive metals, or the toxic metals. So this planet here, I think I'm going to set up just purely as a processing factory planet. That will also allow me on some of these other planets to focus more on production, because the one thing I'm short of is precious metals. There's always a little bit of a gap on the precious metals, so if I can up the precious metal production, I can get even more out of this. Now, as I say, this is by no means min-maxed, so we'll see what I can get out of it when I rebuilt it and put it all back together. But what we really want to know is when I run out and pick all this stuff up, I've actually got the produce from the last production run still sat here in an epiphal. Now, if you're not aware, an epiphal is a very nice ship that has a planetary commodities hold. Starts off with a 45,000 cubic meter capacity, and every level of Galante industrial skill will put that up 10%. So I'm up to 67,500 here because Crankbot has level 5 Galante industrial. This all basically exists purely to do industry, to do a little bit of scouting, and probably for the first 2 years of its existence, the only ship it had was a Nereus. So there you go. So we progressed a bit since then. But this is what we've got in 3 days. The reactive metals is a surplus from the production, which I do sell off. This is kind of a genuine surplus, but we'll see when I rebuild everything if that can be accommodated back into the production. Hopefully it can, especially if I can increase my yield of precious metals. Construction blocks, we've got 15 millions worth according to the estimated price, and we've got 38 millions worth of the mechanical parts. So all in all, in 3 days, I've made 76 million ISK. So over the course of a month, talking about over 760 million ISK for what is basically about half an hour every 3 days to run around these planets, pick up the stuff, move the stuff around. I wait till the epithal is full, and then I will go out of low sec. Now, getting in and out of low sec, as I've shown you many times, is not as scary as many people seem to feel it is. I know we all have bad experiences at gate camps, etc. But basically, I will scout my way out using another alt, or even if I've only got one alt. I appreciate that you might have a similar setup, but it's all on one account, so you don't have the facility that I have of having all 3 of these alts logged in together. But you can easily just fly through in your pod if you want to, or in a less noticeable ship. Check the route out and just wait. If it's busy, just don't go yet. Don't push your luck. I always find enough time to run around Anne, which can be frantically busy sometimes. I always find a little window where I can just pot around, do my thing. And the golden rule, especially here in low sec, is you do all your PI management whilst you're docked, as all these alts are. We've got that range where you can be a little bit remote, or you can be very remote from the actual location to do the management. I obviously have to come here. I can't just can't just keep clicking the cycles remotely, because I need to actually move the materials around to keep the production going. But it's, as I say, once every 3 days, half an hour. So if we times that by 10, what we talk about, 5 hours a month for 576 million ISK. And that's with quite a basic setup. None of them are above level 3 on the upgrade skill. Do bear that in mind. These are quite simple basic setups. So maybe in the next episode I will show you how I've rebuilt all my PI, and we will see if I've increased the 3-day yield up from 76 million ISK. I'm sure I will, and I think it could be a reasonably substantial increase. Right before we go, lastly, let's show you the comparison between the yield we saw out in high sec in Metzerel, that a 12-hour cycle was going to produce about 2200 units of reactive metals. Now here, if you look here, the 12-hour cycle that I've set here just for illustration, is going to produce 552,444 units of base metals. So if we get our calculator out, we can go 552,444, and remember we need to divide that by 3,000. That's the number going into a batch for production, and then times it by 20, because that's the number of reactive metals that a batch run produces. 3,682.96. So that's quite an increase from about 2,200 up to nearly 3,700. So that's the difference between being in a 0.7 out in Metzerel and being in Ann, which is a 0.3 in terms of yield. And also of note, of course, is the fact that in Metzerel we couldn't see any precious metals on any of the planets. And here we can find some precious metals, certainly enough to keep our production running. So anyway, as I say, we're going to give this a tweak and a bit of a renovation between now and another episode, which I shall do, just really to see how high I can get the income when I've given this all a good bit of a tidy up and factored in the capacity I've got due to skill increases, etc. So I hope you found this useful, guys. I hope you found it a little bit inspiring. I hope you're going to get a little bit of PI set up. As I say, I do this in a very lazy way. I'll be the first to admit that. It's basically very, very passive income, nearly 800 million a month, not really paying too much attention to it, to be honest with you. Now, I've also mentioned that I had a PI set up in a wormhole, and here it is. This is my oldest granddad of an old Pine Ridge Raider. So he has got 5 planets set up in a wormhole. Now, we have no station in the wormhole. I basically do this PI in a similar way to Red Willow Charante gets on. Sometimes Pine Ridge Raider here will just log off in the wormhole. He pops out into Saline to do a bit of industry, to pop to the shops, etc, etc. If I'm not going to get back into the wormhole, I'll send another ult into the wormhole so I never lose its location. And I basically just do it just like that. But what we want to see is the comparison. So 12-hour cycle, we're actually on heavy metals there because of what I'm producing here is obviously tied to what's on the planet, but it's a comparable yield normally to reactive metals. But you can see 1 million in a 12-hour cycle, so that's double what we were getting even in low sec. And if we go to some of the precious metal planets, even there, if we just tidy this up just a little bit, put this down to a 12-hour cycle, so I'm getting 900,000 units of noble metals from this planet in 12 hours, which is just astronomical compared to even what you're going to get in low sec. So if you want to venture out into a wormhole, it's easier to do with a station in the system, but it's certainly not impossible to do it without one. Anyway, guys, that's it for today. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Please leave it a like if you've liked it, if this has been useful. Any questions, comments, suggestions, please feel free to leave them in a comment, or join us on Discord. We're usually lurking around there somewhere. You're more than welcome. No question is too complicated or too simple for us to deal with. Subscribe if you'd like to stay in touch. Remember to click that notification bell. Apparently it's very important, so you just know when we've got a new video coming out. We'll be back with Red Willow Charante in her wormhole very, very soon. But remember, for now, take care of yourselves and each other. Remember, even is believing, and goodbye.